This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Valeria Teles interviews Amy Pershing, the author of Binge Eating Disorder, The Journey to Recovery and Beyond. Amy Pershing, LMSW, ACSW, is the founder of Bodywise Binge Eating Disorder Recovery Program and the clinical director at the Center for Eating Disorders in Ann Arbor. Based on 30 years of clinical experience, Amy has pioneered a treatment approach for BED that is strengths-based, incorporating internal family systems and somatic trauma techniques. Her approach also integrates attuned eating and movement, and a health at every size philosophy. Amy offers 2- and 3-day intensives for those in recovery and is the creator of Hungerwise, a 9-week program for ending chronic dieting and weight cycling offered jointly with St. Joseph Mercy Health System in Michigan. Pershing lectures internationally and writes extensively on the treatment of BED and her own recovery journey for both professional and lay communities. She has been featured on radio, podcast, and television speaking about BED treatment and recovery, relapse prevention, weight stigma, and attuned eating and movement. She is the winner of BEDA's 2016 Pioneer in Clinical Advocacy Award and has served on a variety of professional boards. She is the past chair of the Binge Eating Disorder Association and its current chair of BED Clinical Education. Amy maintains her clinical practice treating BED in Ann Arbor. Meet Amy on thebodywiseprogram.com. Here is the interview with Amy Pershing.
In your own words, who is Amy Pershing?
What a lovely question. I would say I'm someone who asks questions of anything I'm presented. I'm very much a questioner. I want to go deeper. I want to know why. I always end up wanting to get to the very root. I'm someone who believes that we're always shifting and changing and growing. In my field, I'm often asked, what is the process to be recovered? And I don't know that I actually believe that there is such a thing as recovered with a period at the end of the sentence. I like to think I will be evolving always. And I'm also someone who is very curious. I want to know all the different ways to be a person, to be human, to be in culture, to relate to each other.
What does it mean to be a human being to you, Amy?
I think one of the things that feels the most, sort of precious about us, the most exquisite to me, is our ability to look in, as I said, so to get to know who we are, but also to see ourselves as part of a whole, as part of community. And I think also to learn from our experience, to be able to broaden how we think about life and living. I think that's what makes us human. I certainly fear for the human animal. sometimes. I think we sometimes have things at our disposal, like technology, that we're not psychologically ready for. And I do worry about us. But I feel very hopeful too.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. I never heard the way you just said. So technology, we're not quite ready for it. I'm wondering why. Why is that?
I think to have something with as immediate and broad an impact and to use it well, we have to have a lot of insight in why we're responding to something in a particular way. And I think I'm really, one way I sort of think about this, I'm always surprised that in most schools, psychology is not a class.
Right.
I find that really astonishing. There's no sort of, we're not given the user's manual.
So true. I agree.
We're not really taught about how to go in and how to do it without shame. How to be with ourselves well. And I think until we can do that, something that is as reactive and impulse driven as, say, the internet has real potential for danger. And I think we see that. So that worries me.
What does it mean to you, or what is the meaning of healthy? To be healthy, what does it look like from your perspective?
For me, I don't think that there is, and this is just from working with clients for many years and on my own journey of trying to figure out what healthy is for me. I don't think that I don't think it's a one size fits all narrative. I don't think it's even necessarily very often externally really determined for any individual person. To me, healthy fundamentally means listening. It means listening to our body. It means listening to I think our body has tremendous wisdom. And in so many ways, we're taught to either overlook it or suppress it. And I think about, we're taught, for example, not to eat in response to our body, but to diet. Right? We're really taught not to trust our gut, but to, push through. To me, healthy really fundamentally is about listening and trusting.
For a moment, talk to me about diets in general.
Well, it is certainly a broad, and meaningful topic for me. So I can start personally with, I started my first diet when I was 10 years old. It was Scarsdale, if anyone remembers that. And I dieted off and on, always, until I went into eating disorder treatment, actually. But I think one of the things that I was taught is that my body was not okay. I was in a body that was bigger than was accepted. And so I learned that my body was something in need of controlling and something in need of fixing, not something in need of listening to and trusting. And I was taught that if you have willpower and you, are earnest in your efforts, that you will be thin, that is a reasonable and even desirable and necessarily a healthy goal for everybody. And so that's what I learned. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I learned in the form of a diet that someone else knows better how to feed my body than I do. I was taught that if a diet didn't work, it was because I wasn't doing it properly or I had cheated or failed. We use these very moralizing words, you cheated on your diet. The other piece of it, I think, too, is that when we're focusing so much on this aesthetic ideal, this sort of notion that thin is something to be attained or protected if a person already lives in a thin body, that if we're taught that that's something of value to pursue, the amount of time and energy and money that women especially, and increasing numbers of men, spend an extraordinary amount of money and time and energy to do. And I think about how much time and energy I wasted pursuing that ideal. So I think dieting really fundamentally is predicated on shame, and shame makes a lot of money. Right? So I think as an industry, it is damaging. I think for women, it keeps them from trusting their bodies and living fully in their bodies. Dieting is a gateway to eating disorders. The vast majority of people with eating disorders have significant dieting histories. So dieting alone, of course, is not enough to cause an eating disorder, but it is a gateway drug. So I could talk for a very long time, but I will take a breath.
Yeah. I have to take a breath too, because that also made me think about this is a question I had for you earlier about intuitive eating. Is this something that you recommend we do?
It is. Yes. Intuitive eating is, it's interesting even that we have to construct something called intuitive eating.
Right, true. As a concept, my idea.
Right. Right. Yeah. That we have to have some name or something, right?
Yeah, it's true.
That basically means listening to cues and trusting them. You said something about, eating a plant-based diet that for you that feels, I think I understood you, or for whomever, that may feel like their body feels its best.
Yeah, for me it does. Yeah, it feels better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what I think that's a wonderful way to think about how you're guided to that way of feeding your body, right? And I think that's ultimately the goal of intuitive eating, that there isn't a way to eat, but that there's a way for my body to eat and your body to eat and someone else's body to eat. We really don't know, in terms of the research, in terms of the science, we really don't know the optimal diet for a human body. And I would suggest that there may not be such a thing, that it may indeed be that there are differences among us about what makes for a healthy body. And so I think the more we can pay attention, how do you feel if you eat plant-based? Other people might feel weakened or tired from that. Perhaps we can pay attention to our own individual truths.
It's my next question. Do you believe we all have a unique purpose for this life?
I believe that each of us has fundamentally something that I refer to in my work as our unique or authentic self. That is a part of us that is unharmed by trauma, that is intrinsically compassionate and curious, that is open, that is protective, that is able to go in and go out. I think each of those authentic, unique selves, I think it's our job as best we're able to connect to that energy, to come back to it when we wander away. When I connect to that energy, sometimes in meditation, sometimes really when I'm walking in my yard. I'm extremely blessed to have a lot of trees and just a beautiful area. And that connects me to something of which I am a part, but that is much larger. And from that space, I feel like I have access to who I really am. So I think each of us, in our own ways, is on that journey. It's different for everyone.
And it is so true. And you mentioned nature. There's something about nature that definitely connects us to that authentic self, as you call it. or the heart or the intuition. And I wonder why. Sometimes I do ask the question to some people, but I'll ask you, do you wonder why?
Well, I feel like for me anyway, I can answer it from that point. But for me, I think it's such a powerful connective force because I'm part of it. I mean, fundamentally, I think we do this kind of humans versus nature sort of dichotomy, and that doesn't make sense. I think that serves people who want to have power over nature, and so when I'm in it, I know I'm of it, and that feels, I think, in a very fundamental way, like I'm home. Right? That there's nothing to fix because nothing's broken, right? Things just are. Yes.
What do you love most about being a woman?
About being a woman?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, many things. Many things. What a great question. I would say that I think in a way, one of the things that I love about being a woman right now, actually, is, so I think I have to define it partly as my place in time, is that I think we're, to a greater degree maybe than ever before, women are being encouraged to get to know themselves on their own terms, not to get to know themselves as they relate to a male way of being in the world. Right? So we're able, I think, to not sort of say, how well do I fit into the patriarchy, but who am I? I like that we're challenging the notions of masculine and feminine and what that even means. I feel like those are social constructs anyway. And so I think women in some ways have more permission than they ever have. And in some ways more permission often than at least straight, cisgendered, men have. To be able to embody both masculine and feminine.
The follow-up question for that one is, have you faced any challenges for being a woman?
Oh, many.
Tell me about it.
Many. Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, I think, certainly because I treat eating disorders, and so I work a lot with women's relationships with their bodies. And so certainly I think one of the challenges that I would say is overarching for much of my life is a sense of having to be careful. Moving around in the world, having to be aware of where dangers might be, being careful about where you walk at night, or how you look. Those kinds of things have shaped how I feel safe or don't feel safe in the world. So most certainly that is a piece of it. I think I've worked a long time in this field. I think that we've had, as eating disorder clinician, I've noticed as in fields where when I started in this field, even though the vast majority of people struggling with eating disorders were women, the experts, quote unquote, in the field were all white men. Yeah. So we had very few people with the voice of experience in the lead in the communities. And so I think that was it too, is we had this immediate lack of credibility as women. And that's taken a long time to challenge.
Do you think it's changing at this time, those challenges?
I do think it's changing. I think I do think it's changing. The young women that I work with as clients and as colleagues, I do a lot of professional supervision, and they are necessarily questioning as part of treatment patriarchal values, or homophobia, or the things, the systems that have kept any of us in a very small role, not being able to be truly authentic. And that's different. That was not true when I started in my career. So much more now, I think, is this permission to talk about person and environment and understand how, for example, moving around in the world in your body as a woman and not feeling safe affects you psychologically.
Right.
Because it profoundly does.
Freedom. What is the meaning of freedom to you? What is to be free, finally?
I think freedom is to truly be able to, as I said earlier, to listen and to trust. I think, I am at the age I'm, thinking about retirement in the coming years, and what I've realized at getting to this time in my life is that there are many ways that I, worked more than I should have, and did these things because they're expected, sort of what is the next level in my career. And of course I would want to do that, because why would you not want to do that? Right. They're just this sort of given to keep going and going and going. And that has been always in my life defined as success. And I think we need to challenge that as a culture. So to me, freedom is to be able to suspend expectations, not to dismiss them. We can look at them and see if they truly fit us. But I think to be able to live authentically and to be able to live in transition. I think we're always in transition.
Change and transitions, renewal, right?
And to live in the body that is, speaking just from my own, work experience, part of freedom for me is also about being able to live in the body that is most true to you without any kind of stigma or oppression.
I have one more warm-up question. This is about the challenges 2020 and the change. Speaking of change, what have you learned from 2020?
Oh, dear.
I know.
Well, many things. I've learned, I think first and foremost, I've learned, I am just, let me say it this way, just how critical to sanity connection truth is. How much the longing to be with my people is physical and spiritual and psychological and emotional. I miss my people, and I can see them on Zoom, and I can, whatever, I can talk to them on the phone. It's not the same. That there's a fundamental energy of being together that really sustains us in a way I think I wouldn't have understood. I understood that intellectually, but now I understand it somatically. I understand it viscerally. I didn't before. I think that's the single biggest. And then maybe another thing is I have I've found some fear for us going forward as a species, I guess. And the degree to which we are able to feel empathy, the degree to which something seems to be important to us only if it is near and dear to us, is disturbing to me. I worry that people are not able to understand others' pain and they judge it, that we judge and we lash out when we're afraid. And so that scares me. I think we have a longer road to go than I thought. And that makes me sad, and also hopeful in the sense that I'm seeing other people understand that too, and also be worried about it. And I think that's the good news, actually.
I do have another question for you, the warm-up questions. Spirituality, what is it to you?
I think for me, I'm a bit of a cosmology nerd.
Yeah.
I am absolutely fascinated by trying to understand just the nature of all of this. And so that, to me, that's I don't have I'm not a religious person. I'm not a spiritual person in a traditional sense. But I am profoundly curious about the why and the what's next. I don't feel like I have any of the answers, and I'm okay with that. I feel like I know the answers, or that I'm always suspicious when people say they do. So I think I'm learning to live with. I won't know, but it is the discovery and the asking the question that has to be, and it is.
So, how did you become a writer, and what was the intention of writing your book, Binge Eating Disorder: The Journey to Recovery and Beyond?
I've always been a writer. I've always written. I've written poetry and fiction, and I've always been a writer. My mother was a writer, and so that's it's a primary way for me to get at what's going on inside. So it's always been a path in for me. But this book in particular came about because in the field there have been a lot of books really about the other eating disorders, about anorexia and bulimia. Those are typically in the sort of popular culture. When we think of an eating disorder, we think of anorexia. We think of disorder of restriction, of starvation, and my eating disorder didn't fit that. I certainly did restrict, but I was not anorexic. And I came to realize that I was either on a diet or I was binging. I was binge eating. I was eating very large amounts of food in a very short period of time. I felt out of control, unable to stop it. And I went into treatment for that, and really there wasn't any name for what I was experiencing. And so I really just kind of had to find my own way, and sort of kludge together some of what already existed in eating disorder treatment. But that was not really sufficient. And so as I went through my training and I went through my own recovery, and I really came to realize that this is a different thing. And so it certainly has commonalities with other eating disorders. Most people with binge eating disorder, for example, have histories of restriction. But it really is something very different. I also learned just how important weight stigma and thin privilege really are to the body shame that for many people drives binge eating disorder. So as time went on, it became pretty clear that a book was a good idea. And then finally, a publisher actually approached me and asked me about doing it. And I said, I think this is a sign from somewhere that it's time. So that's where it came from.
I know we use different words or labels: a disorder, conditions, disease, illness. Why disorder for this kind of let's say, imbalance? That sounds like an imbalance to me.
I'm not crazy about the term disorder anyway.
Me too. For some reason, the label disordered illness, right. But
I don't like words. Yeah, I don't like it for a number of reasons. One is it's pathologizing. And what I find to be true actually is that eating disorders in general, but I'm just going to speak to binge eating disorder. It is very often adaptive. Many of my clients have trauma histories, and what we find is that the relationship that they have with food is protective in many ways. And so to suggest that something is a disorder implies pathology. And I don't look at I don't look at binge eating disorder that way. I look at it from a strengths perspective. I try to work with people to understand how that relationship with food is adaptive and protective. And so to me, it's not a disorder. But I think what it speaks to, that word speaks to, is that we pathologize things so deeply. You think about we have a diagnostic and statistical manual. We have International Classification of Diseases, right? We have these sort of ways that we say this is what is normal, and if you deviate from this in some way, we have a code that we call a disorder or a syndrome or whatever. I find that if we look at how many of those behaviors are adaptive, we would not apply the word disorder nearly as often as we do.
I know that for the sake of studies in your case, in science, they have to use words and categories.
Right. And many, I think that's a significant piece of it, is that, we unfortunately, in order to have insurance coverage for services or in order to obtain research dollars, we have to have codes. We have to have disorders and syndromes and things that we're defining. And while I do understand that does make sense, unfortunately, it really removes the meaning often of symptomatology. And so we're left with it really being this kind of discrete thing that's almost separate from the person. And often it is not separate at all.
You said you wrote Healing Binge Eating Disorder. It's not an easy journey. So my question is, what are the greatest challenges, Amy, in recovering or healing BED?
There are many. I would say some of them are some of them are internal, and some of them are in the environment in which the person finds themselves. So, for example, access to treatment is very poor. If we look at it kind of in terms of our whole. Actually, it's pretty poor everywhere. But if we look at it in terms of our country, there's very limited access to appropriate treatment. There's limited recognition that, with binge eating disorder in particular, that it is an eating disorder. For many people still, if they go to their primary care person and that person's not informed about binge eating disorder, and the person says, I'm struggling with this, with these overeating episodes, very often what happens is they're prescribed a diet. And diets drive the behavior. And so what we end up having this behavior, in fact, reinforced. So there are a lot of things environmentally that sustain the eating disorder instead of create space for it to heal. Internally, some of the toughest things, if we think about, again, the degree to which a person goes to food to disconnect from what may be intolerable internally. So for many of my clients who are survivors of physical or sexual trauma, or whatever it might be, emotional abuse as a child, or myriad issues, they're to be safe, they've had to disconnect from much of their internal experience. And so it is a tremendous amount of courage that is required to allow space to do that healing. So that's part of why it's a tough journey. I often say to people, like if I'm just doing trainings and things, that it is the toughest thing I've ever done in my own personal life, and it is also the most important thing I have ever done.
So I'm wondering, what's the process of discovering the causes of binge eating disorder?
one piece of it, I said earlier, I think part of one of the things that becomes really important, I think, in order to develop as a person, is to be able to look inside safely. It should feel safe to go in. That's a big part of the work of healing. Now, that's a 30,000-foot sort of view, but that's a big part of it, is that hopefully my clients will be able, as they move along, to increasingly go in safely and hear whatever is there from that compassionate self. So part of what we do is to understand what are the triggers, what are the of binge episodes, what are the things that different parts of a person are going to a binge to do. Sometimes it's to deal with restriction from a diet. Sometimes it's that simple. But often it's more complicated than that. Perhaps a person got triggered and reminded at a core level about some trauma from the past. They might not be aware that that's what's going on, but they find themselves eating ice cream or whatever it might be. So part of our job is to each of us get good at knowing our language around food, knowing what parts of us have things to say and are using that relationship with food to do it, whether it's or restriction, actually.
How do we know when we are displaying these kinds of behaviors, this imbalanced and dysfunctional relationship with food?
Well, one is the more disconnected we are from our body cues, the more we're either overeating or undereating, the more we're not able to tend to those cues, right? The more evidence that there's an eating disorder. So that's one thing. Also, I think, is just body obsession. How much time and energy is being spent thinking about fixing something about your body? How shame-driven is your relationship with your body, right? How much checking do you do? We often refer to body checking behaviors with eating disorders. How often are you worrying about how someone is perceiving your body? And again, we have to make note that that's partly internally driven, but it's also externally driven, right? In the form of weight stigma in our culture in every direction.
I'm wondering if thinking about, even overthinking or thinking too much about food is also part of a sign that there is an issue.
Absolutely. I think one way we could look at it is the moralization around food. So do you feel better or worse about yourself based on what you eat? If you do, if there's any shift or change, or I should say significant shift or change in how you view yourself based on what you have or have not eaten, if it's to a clinical level, it takes over much of your life. But I would argue that's never a good thing, right? You have an eating disorder. Right? Shame is never a motivator of change. Love is a motivator of change. Right? My body is something I should be seeking to cherish, not to change, not to fix, right? But to protect.
And that's interesting that I'm realizing now how much I think about food. Oh, I need to eat this and it has to be healthy, and that doesn't seem to be... Okay, I have some work to do. Some more work to do in this, some meditation to do.
We all do. And I think too, right. we can have that sort of narrative that, food is supposed to be healthy, and we have that good food, bad food dichotomy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that, especially when there's an eating disorder present, right? We have this sort of setup that I'm good if I eat good food and I'm bad if I eat bad food. And I think, again, what's true is all food provides something. Some food provides a lot of nutrition. Some food simply provides joy. Let's see if we can pay attention to how different foods feel in our bodies. How do we respond to them? right? If we set up this narrative, again, especially when there's an eating disorder, that, you should eat broccoli, but you shouldn't eat brownies. If you think about, well, lo and behold, people don't binge on broccoli.
True. So true.
They binge broccoli, right? Or, excuse me, they binge on brownies. They go to the very thing that is forbidden. Suppose there isn't something forbidden, but we learn to pay attention. And I think we have that, most people have that terror that if they aren't watching themselves, they will eat nothing but brownies, right? That they will never touch the broccoli. And in fact, that's not what we find. Right? What we find is where there is permission, there is wisdom. There is the ability to listen, right? And of course, too, Valerie, what we know is that all of this is predicated on access to good food.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And not everyone has that access.
True.
So we have to remember that too.
You said something interesting in your book, that body hate happens principally as a result of wanting to be accepted by very judgmental systems. So we're trying to fit in, which in your book you say recovery is about being true to yourself and your own path. I absolutely love that. And you have talked about in so many different ways. Would you like to add anything, Emmy, or read a passage in your book before I ask you my final questions?
I always, when I have the chance, I just invite people to consider, what would happen if you could trust your body? What would change? What would be different in your life if your body was this body just the way it is for the rest of your life? What would change if you knew you couldn't change your weight? If you had to let that struggle go, what would change? And I just find that's an interesting question. So I always like to just toss that question out for people to consider.
What was the hardest lesson to learn about yourself and life as of today?
Oh, the hardest lesson. I think I would say the hardest lesson is that I tend to meet fear with anger. And that has been something I've had to work on. That is one of the toughest things, is when I get scared, I tend to get angry. And so I think that's been the toughest thing for me, is being able to find a path to compassion for that anger and allowing it to step back a bit so that I can safely know when I'm afraid.
I found creativity to be the antidote to fear. Every time I'm afraid or fear arises, I just come up with something new. I create something, whatever it is. And that changes the energy of fear.
Yes, I agree very much. I've also found for me that just allowing myself to be with fear, learning how to do that, so that, sometimes it's just something, not always, but sometimes it's just something I need to feel through instead of alter.
Do you believe in the practice of unconditional self-love?
Yes, most definitely. Most definitely.
Yeah. And do you think it's possible to achieve that state of being, Emmy?
I think when we are in self, we are necessarily 100% unconditional. That was an interesting slip. That we're 100% unconditional. I think that's part of self. Self brings compassion, and compassion allows whatever's there just to be without judgment.
So it is actually accessing the self that will change everything.
Yeah, I think I think it's very much possible. I think where it can get impossible is when we sort of have this narrative that I will accept I will be unconditional as soon as I do these things. That's conditional.
True. What a dance, an interesting dance life is. If you knew you would die soon, meaning losing the body, would you make any change in your life or do anything in a different way?
No. No. I don't think so. I would, if I knew that was coming, I might work a little bit less.
That's always very inviting, inspiring, that idea of working less. Yeah.
But my work is also very meaningful to me. So, I think just I would spend even more time with the people that I love. But I try to work hard on that balance. So I guess big picture, I would say no, I wouldn't.
What are 3 things about life you know for sure as of now?
Oh, 3. Wow, that's. I guess I would say 3 things. Let's see. There is no, like I said, there is no such thing as being done or as being kind of ending growth. I think we're always changing. So there's that. I think that we absolutely unnecessarily categorize things that we shouldn't. I think so many things really are spectrums, whether it's gender, sexuality, or body size, or whatever it is. I think we necessarily cut off our ability to explore who we are fully. So that is one thing I do know. And I know also that we have a tremendous capacity for healing. I have seen some of the most, listened to some of the most tragic stories in the course of my career, and I have seen resiliency, the likes of which are just extraordinary. So I feel like whatever we face, we can come through the other side. It does not mean we will come through undamaged, but we will come through.
Thank you so much again, Amy, for your healing wisdom, your beautiful and genuine presence, your message. Again, I love your message in so many different ways. And I have one more question for you, but this is a technical one. Where can we find more information about you, your books, products, services, and future projects?
Well, thank you, first of all, just for having me. It's been a delightful conversation, so thank you so much for that. And you can, if you go to thebodywiseprogram.com, that has links to the podcasts that I've done and my book, and just various different things, and the treatment that we do, and so that's the easiest way.
Thank you so much again, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much, Valeria.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Amy Pershing and her work, please visit thebodywiseprogram.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.